Think about this. How much of your life has been shaped by the need for approval? How many decisions have you made not because they were right for you, but because you feared what others might think? Imagine living in a world where every action you take is measured by the expectations of others, where your sense of self is built not on your own desires, but on external validation. What if I told you that this endless chase for social approval is not only exhausting, but also preventing you from reaching your full potential? Today, we are going to explore the psychological roots of this behavior and how the insights of Carl Jung and Alfred Adler can help you break free. The final insight we will reveal is the most powerful. It has the potential to completely change how you see yourself and the world around you. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may never think about approval the same way again. From the moment we are born, we begin to crave approval. As children, we learn that behaving in certain ways earns us praise, while other behaviors lead to disapproval. A smile from a parent, a teacher's nod of approval, or the laughter of our peers, all of these moments teach us that we are accepted when we conform. Over time, this conditioning becomes deeply ingrained in our psychology. We begin to equate acceptance with self-worth, believing that our value is determined by how much others approve of us. But here's the problem. No matter how hard we try, we can never satisfy everyone. Carl Jung believed that this external conditioning forces us to create a persona, a social mask that we wear to fit into the world. The persona is not necessarily false. It is a necessary part of functioning in society. However, when we become too attached to it, we lose touch with our authentic selves. We begin to believe that we are only worthy when we meet external expectations. Meanwhile, the parts of us that don't fit this ideal are pushed into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow consists of all the aspects of ourselves that we suppress because they don't align with what society deems acceptable. These are not necessarily negative traits. Often they are simply our true thoughts, feelings, and desires that we have learned to hide. Consider this. Have you ever held back an opinion because you feared it would be unpopular? Have you ever forced yourself to smile when you felt like crying? Have you ever followed a path in life that wasn't truly yours, just to gain acceptance? These are all signs that you are living for approval rather than authenticity. And the longer you do this, the more dissected you become from who you truly are. Jung warned that suppressing the shadow does not make it disappear. Instead, it manifests in unhealthy ways: self-doubt, anxiety, resentment, or even depression. The more we ignore our true selves, the more fragmented we become. We end up living in constant tension, torn between the person we want to be and the person we think the world wants us to be. Alfred Adler took this idea further by introducing the concept of the inferiority complex. He believed that much of human behavior is driven by a deep-seated feeling of not being enough. This feeling of inferiority pushes us to seek external validation, to prove to the world and to ourselves that we matter. We chase status, admiration, and approval, hoping that they will make us feel complete. But Adler's key insight was this: true confidence does not come from external validation. It comes from within. He argued that the healthiest individuals are those who develop a strong sense of social interest. This is not the same as seeking approval. It is a sense of connection to humanity that is not based on competition or validation. It is the ability to contribute to the world without needing constant reassurance that you are good enough. In other words, the more you focus on living a meaningful life, the less you will crave approval. But how do we escape this cycle? How do we break free from the need for validation and reconnect with our true selves? The first step is awareness. You must recognize how deeply this need for approval is embedded in your thoughts and behaviors. Ask yourself, how many of my choices are truly mine, and how many are shaped by the fear of judgment? How much of my identity is built on what I think others expect from me? Once you begin to see this pattern, you can start to question it. The truth is, no matter what you do, someone will always have an opinion about you. Some will approve and others will criticize. But here's the secret: their opinions have nothing to do with your worth. When you stop defining yourself by external approval, you start discovering who you really are. And this is just the beginning. The deeper we go, the more we will uncover about the forces shaping our need for validation. But the most powerful realization, the one that can truly set you free, is still ahead. Stay with me, because what comes next might just change your entire perspective on life. There is a profound shift that happens when you stop seeking approval and start living for yourself. At first, it feels unsettling, even frightening. You may worry about rejection, about losing people, about feeling isolated. But what if I told you that the very people you fear disappointing are often trapped in the same cycle, that they too are wearing masks, adjusting their personalities and shaping their lives around the expectations of others? The reality is, most people are not as focused on you as you think. They are too consumed with their own fears of judgment. Carl Jung spoke about the process of individuation, which is the journey of integrating all parts of the self, the persona, the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, into a whole, authentic being. Individuation is not about rejecting society or becoming a loner. It is about discovering who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning. It is about recognizing that your true value does not come from how well you fit in, but from how deeply you understand yourself. One of the greatest obstacles to this journey is the fear of rejection. From an evolutionary standpoint, humans are social creatures. Thousands of years ago, being excluded from a group could mean death, so our brains evolved to avoid rejection at all costs. This is why social approval feels so important. It is wired into us. But the world we live in today is not the same as it was thousands of years ago. You no longer need to conform for survival. Yet many people still live as if their very existence depends on being liked by others. Alfred Adler believed that much of our suffering comes from comparing ourselves to others. He argued that when we measure our worth by external standards, how attractive we are, how successful, how popular, we create an illusion of inferiority. We believe that if we could just gain more approval, we would finally feel enough. But this is a lie. No amount of external validation will ever be enough because the problem is not outside of us, it is inside. Think about it. Have you ever reached a goal, received praise, and still felt empty? Have you ever gained the approval of someone you admired, only to realize it didn't bring you the fulfillment you expected? This is because external approval is temporary. It comes and goes. The moment you base your worth on it, you are at the mercy of forces you cannot control. So what can you do instead? How do you break free from this cycle? The answer lies in shifting your focus from external validation to internal validation. Instead of asking, "Do they approve of me?" start asking, "Do I approve of myself?" Instead of worrying about whether others think you are enough, start defining what enough means for you. Adler proposed that the key to true confidence is developing a sense of purpose beyond the need for approval. He believed that those who dedicate themselves to meaningful work, personal growth, and contributing to the world in a way that aligns with their values become naturally confident, not because they are seeking validation, but because they are living in alignment with their true selves. This does not mean you should ignore feedback or dismiss others completely. It is natural to want to be liked. The problem arises when you make approval the foundation of your self-worth. The healthiest mindset is one where you value connection but are not dependent on it. You listen to others, but you do not let their opinions define you. You appreciate validation, but you do not crave it. The challenge, of course, is rewiring years, sometimes decades, of conditioning. It takes effort to unlearn the belief that your worth is tied to what others think. It requires practice to make decisions based on what feels right for you rather than what will gain approval. And yes, it requires courage to face rejection and still stand firm in who you are. But here is the truth. The more you embrace your authentic self, the more you will attract people who appreciate you for who you truly are. The relationships you build will be based on honesty rather than performance. The confidence you develop will be real rather than fragile. And most importantly, you will begin to experience a deep sense of freedom, the kind that comes from knowing that you are enough exactly as you are. Now, let me ask you, what would your life look like if you stopped seeking approval? How would you feel if you no longer needed to prove yourself to anyone? And most importantly, what is one thing you have been holding back because of fear of judgment? Reflect on this, because in the next section, we are going even deeper. There is one final powerful insight that has the potential to completely change the way you see yourself and the world around you. Stay with me, because what comes next may be the most important realization of all. Most people spend their entire lives seeking approval without realizing that the approval they crave will never be enough. No matter how much validation they receive, it never fills the void inside. And yet they keep chasing it, changing their behavior, suppressing their true selves, and molding their identities to fit what others expect. But here's the hard truth. The moment you rely on others to define your worth, you give them complete control over your happiness. You become a prisoner of their opinions, forever seeking validation that will never bring lasting fulfillment. Carl Jung believed that true self-discovery begins when we stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for meaning. He warned that people who live only through their personas, those carefully crafted identities built for social acceptance, eventually face an internal crisis. This crisis happens when they realize that the life they built is not truly theirs. Maybe they achieved success, gained admiration, or built a reputation, but deep down, they feel empty. Why? Because they have spent so much time living for others that they no longer know who they really are. Jung argued that this is why people often experience deep dissatisfaction despite having everything society tells them they should want. They followed the script. They got the right job, the right partner, the right image, but they still feel unfulfilled. And the reason is simple. They have neglected their true selves in pursuit of external approval. The only way out of this emptiness is to turn inward, to strip away the persona and embrace the full complexity of who you are. Alfred Adler's work reinforces this idea, emphasizing that genuine self-worth comes from within, not from comparison or validation. He argued that much of human suffering is caused by a false belief that we must prove ourselves to be worthy. He called this the striving for superiority, the endless attempt to be better, more successful, more admired than others. But Adler's most powerful insight was that real confidence does not come from being superior, it comes from self-acceptance. Think about this. If your sense of worth depends on being admired, what happens when the admiration fades? If your confidence is built on status, what happens if you lose it? If your happiness depends on approval, how will you ever be truly free? Adler's philosophy suggests that the only way to break free from this trap is to stop measuring yourself by external standards and start defining success on your own terms. This is where the real work begins. If you want to stop seeking approval, you have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to accept that some will not understand you. You have to be okay with the fact that not everyone will like you. This is not easy, but it is necessary. Every great thinker, innovator, and visionary in history faced rejection because they refused to conform. If they had sought constant approval, they would have never achieved anything meaningful. Take a moment and reflect. How much of your life is spent making choices based on what others will think? How many times have you held yourself back because you feared judgment? And more importantly, what would your life look like if you stopped needing permission to be yourself? The key to freedom is shifting from external approval to internal validation. This means asking yourself different questions. Instead of wondering, do they like me? Start asking, do I like myself? Instead of trying to be what others want, focus on becoming the person you respect. And instead of fearing rejection, understand that rejection is proof that you are living authentically. This shift will not happen overnight. Years of conditioning have taught you to seek approval, so breaking the habit requires conscious effort. But the more you practice, the stronger you become. The more you embrace your true self, the less external opinions will affect you. And the day will come when you no longer feel the need to prove yourself to anyone. But we are not done yet. There is still one final and most powerful realization left to uncover, one that has the potential to completely change the way you approach life. If you have come this far, stay with me, because what comes next is the most liberating truth of all. Here is the final and most powerful realization. The need for approval is an illusion. It was never real to begin with. The idea that you must be liked, accepted, or validated to be worthy is nothing more than a belief that has been conditioned into you since childhood, and like all beliefs, it can be questioned, challenged, and ultimately discarded. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is exactly what happens when you seek approval without realizing it. You think that your desire to be accepted is natural, that it is just the way things are. But in reality, it is simply a habit, a deeply ingrained pattern of thought that you have the power to break. Imagine for a moment that you woke up tomorrow and no longer cared about external validation. Imagine living in a way where your choices were not influenced by fear of judgment, where you expressed yourself freely, without worrying about whether others approved. What would that feel like? Would it be terrifying, or would it be liberating? Most people fear this level of freedom because they assume it will lead to isolation. They believe that if they stop seeking approval, they will end up alone. But the truth is the opposite. When you stop trying to please everyone, you start attracting the right people, the ones who appreciate you for who you truly are. And more importantly, you start forming a deep and unshakable connection with yourself. Alfred Adler taught that true belonging does not come from seeking approval. It comes from having the courage to stand alone when necessary. He believed that those who constantly seek validation are not truly connected to others. They are merely performing for acceptance. Real connection happens when you are authentic, when you show up as yourself without pretense. This is where everything changes. When you realize that approval was never the goal, when you understand that your worth has never depended on others, you become untouchable. No rejection can shake you. No criticism can define you. No opinion can dictate how you feel about yourself. This does not mean that you stop caring about others. It does not mean that you become indifferent to human connection. Quite the opposite. It means that your relationships become more genuine. It means that you give freely without expecting validation in return. It means that your self-worth is no longer on the line every time someone disapproves of you. Think about the people you admire the most, the ones who inspire you. Are they the ones who play it safe, who constantly seek approval? Or are they the ones who have the courage to be different, to speak their truth, to live authentically, regardless of what others think? Now ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to live in the shadow of other people's opinions, or do you want to step into the light of your own truth? This is your choice. And the moment you decide to stop seeking approval is the moment you reclaim your freedom. It is the moment you become the person you were always meant to be. So, here is my final question for you. Are you ready to let go of the need for approval? Are you ready to start living for yourself on your own terms? Because the life you truly want, the life that is aligned with your deepest values and desires, begins the moment you decide that you are enough, exactly as you are.